Hi, everybody. If you don't know me, I teach in the Social Studies department, and I teach world history. And this year, for the first time, I'm teaching Holocaust Studies, which is a one-semester elective. And so in tandem with the Holocaust Studies, we also teach modern-day genocides. Unfortunately, we have to say that. I learned about Carl through reading his book, and his book is called I'm Not Leaving. And so, you know, in the brief email that went out, you were given the very small bit of background information about Carl, that he was the only American during the 1994 genocide in Rwanda to not leave. So that's the name of his book, I'm Not Leaving. He is spending the day today speaking to all of my classes. I know Miss Cullum's AP World History class is going to join us for a couple of sessions, as well as Mr. Jones's criminology class. So he will be here today, and if you wish to hear a longer presentation, you're most welcome to come in on your prep. I know Carl would greatly welcome you. The Red Mountain Way theme, courage, respect, and influence. This gentleman epitomizes the word courage, although he is so humble he would tell you he does not. But he does, and I can't think of anyone who was faced with life and death challenges and who made really critical choices that just epitomize courage. And, you know, I'm taking a PD right now called Heroes of the Holocaust, and it's through Mesa Public Schools. And this whole idea of heroes are, and many heroes will tell you, they're just ordinary people who are put in extraordinary situations, and they're defined by their choices. So with that in mind, our sub-theme for courage today is welcoming challenges as opportunities. And I can't think of anyone better than Carl Wilkins to tell you that he took many, many challenges that we would probably throw in our hat on, and he turned them into these wonderful opportunities where he is still in connection with the country of Rwanda today and very integral in bringing educators and educating the world about the reconciliation and healing that can happen even after something as horrid as a genocide. So with that, Carl, I turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. You know, it's funny when you were saying, I'm not leaving, it's like I'm sitting here thinking, as a kid, okay, actually, this is a long time. I spent 11 years at a high school, and I don't know when I've been so excited for a staff meeting. But I was sitting there thinking about that problem kid who never seems to disappear. I'm not leaving. And that's often how I feel when I come in a group of teachers. Yeah, because of some poor choices I made in my youth. But like many of us know, it is possible to change. I mean, it's hard to change a bad reputation. A good reputation we can change really quick. But a bad one. And Rwanda's got like the worst. That's why I love to start with this. For many people, it's got like the worst reputation. You will remember, at least many of you will remember Rwanda for its gorillas, huh? Gorillas in the mist. I was playing this. Let's come back towards the beginning of this. These guys were hired by could we knock down the lights just a little bit? There's some incredible scenery. I'm so proud of this little country. these guys were hired to do a tourism film, but this isn't their tourism. Actually, this is 8 years old now, which I can't believe. So much has changed. But it is this amazing, I call it the little big country, you know, from giraffes to volcanoes to just all kinds of incredible beauty. People, I think it was listed one of the top 10 destinations recently, tourist destinations, which, and clean and safe in terms of low crime rates, no trash on the streets. I could go on, but we've just got a few minutes. So if you want to finish that, you just search Rwanda Vimeo, and you'll come up with that 8 minute. It's the one I tell kids, if your parents haven't given up asking what you learned at school today, this is what you can to show them this evening, Rwanda Vimeo. And remind me, Janine, we have until 7:40, bless you. What time do we finish here, folks? When does the bell ring? Doesn't? No problem? Go as long as I want? Oh, serious? I've got more than 15 minutes? Or let's call it 15. For Carl, let's call it 15. And we'll see where we go from there. I was just back in Rwanda in December. Last year, I've been telling folks, this is just was an amazing year. I got to go to Rwanda 7 times. 7. In December, I was talking to some teachers who I had been to Rwanda with. Every summer, we take teachers to Rwanda, and they're up in Osning. And I said, man, 6 times. I can't believe it. I think I'm done though. And the next morning, there was an email with a ticket. Now, how can you turn down a ticket, huh? And that's a round point, a traffic circle, Christmas time in Rwanda. I just was so taken with the Christmas lights because the last time I was there for Christmas, I think was 95. And I was actually there this time. Okay, that's not such a great picture. I found that with the kids yesterday, and I said, I got to do a screenshot. There we go. That sort of works. Imagine instead of a State of the Union address, we ask the people to give the State of the Union. How are the government's programs matching us as the civilians' priorities? That's what they do every year. This was the 17th year. 2,500 people in this high-tech convention center that's just a couple of years old there. They'll be hosting in June the, the British all around the country, the Commonwealth. There's heads of all the Commonwealth countries will be there in Kigali in June. And this was especially exciting for me. You can see the big screens up there. We were hooked up, video connected with sites around the country. Plus, there was an arena with about 2,000 young people in it, about 15 miles away. So we're all video connected, and people were able. It was interesting as they spoke. The president was sitting right about here in the front row. All the ministers were all across the front. I actually had a second row seat. I felt so fortunate. And there was an MC. And somebody would come up on the screen from, say, the northeast part of the country, and he'd say, almost all of them started with a thank you. Mr. President, thank you for this cancer hospital. It is just, in this rural location, access. Well, okay. That's the problem, the road to the hospital. But they always started with a thank you, this early childhood development center. But there's another section that we could really use They always started with thank you. This guy was like 5 years ago. I don't remember his thank you because this was such a kind of intense exchange. He says 5 years ago, the government was building a building here, hired a contractor, and he didn't pay us. And so the MC of the event directs that question to the Minister of Local Government. And the Minister of Local Government, I'm sorry to say, gives kind of a political no answer. And the president pushes the little button on his microphone, the red light comes on, and he's on the big screen now. And the president starts addressing the Minister of Local Government. Basically, he's just taken the case of this man, and he's now going to argue it for him. In other words, the minister could have just given that no answer, and the ordinary guy would have had to just eat it, so to speak. But not in these meetings. And the president starts asking some very pointed questions to the Minister of Local Government, who really, we can tell, he's got nothing to offer. And so the president says, where's the mayor? And somewhere back among these 2,500 people, the mayor stands up. The camera tunes in on him. Somebody hands him a microphone. And we start having this dialogue between the president and the mayor, which is actually it's live streamed on YouTube, so it's going around the world. It's also on Rwandan radio, so it's going to every hillside around there. Lately, I was imagining a grandpa sitting with his radio and his grandson. That was the same radio grandpa had 25 years ago when the extremists who took over the government were telling him and everybody else to kill their neighbors. And today he's listening to that old radio, and he's hearing the president argue for the case. And the mayor does a little bit of a dance too, but finally the president says, I seem to remember, I thought this was dealt with 3 years ago. He has an incredible memory. One of my friends who works within the president's inner circle, when they're traveling to different places, he says, we finish these really exhausting schedule in China, and we're all on the plane coming back to Rwanda, and we're all the presidential group is kind of crashing, except the president. He's got his nose in some physics journal or in some other thing. This man, they say, maybe 4 hours a night he's sleeping. Now, you might have picked up, I'm super proud. He is the one who led the group who ended the genocide. And we don't have time this morning to get into what, all of the, I'll do a quick little run through the genocide. But, oh, that's a terrible sentence, huh? A quick little run through the genocide. I get to talk about this like probably more than 200 times every year, and so I have to catch myself at times that I can imagine being a student or a faculty member hearing somebody talk about this for particularly not you guys as faculty, but students for the first time, and what all does this mean? But where I was headed was, no, the president, we all far from perfect. And you hear different stories coming out of Rwanda, some very critical and some very admiring, affirming. You hear stories of restorative justice that just blow your socks off. And then you hear about somebody getting killed and you say, oh, so the president has assassins. There's just all kinds of stories, which is life, huh? With 12.6 million people, you're going to have all kinds of stories. But where I'd like to zoom in with you this morning is our family, let's see, am I in the right folder? Yeah, well, let's start with Gasikwa. Gasikwa, I was there with my wife and kids. We were building schools. We'll get to that in a moment. But Gasikwa was one of my colleagues. In Rwanda, the majority were called Hutu, the minority Tutsi. But this isn't a story of one group who hates another group. This is a story of political manipulation of ordinary people and their basic needs. You can understand that. Political manipulation of ordinary people and their basic needs. This is not a story of one group who hates another group. They'll find a way to polarize. And yet for this man, when those messages were coming over the radio about the Tutsis and stuff, I often compare it to like metaphorical bricks flying through the radio waves. He would chuck it aside. Tutsis can't be trusted. Tutsis have always been the source of all of our problems. All these negative messages. But for others, like some of his neighbors, they accepted those messages and they began to build a brick wall between them and their neighbor until it was so high they couldn't see their neighbor's face. All they saw was a poster plastered on the wall that said enemy. And Gasikwa had more than 40 people in his home during the genocide. When they came knocking, he says, yeah, come in. What could I say? Well, you could say, I'm sorry, but each person who comes increases the risk that my wife and 3 children will be killed maybe twice or 4 times. But he's got 40 people in there at one point, and neighbors come to kill. And Gasikwa with a couple of this guy, this is where I'm heading is a little bit of a stretch maybe for some, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this later if you think about it. About 3 years ago, I heard this podcast, The Neuroscience of Happiness, and this idea of neuroplasticity and our ability to form new pathways. And the more we fire certain pathways, the more we rewire our brain. This idea, fire to rewire, that mind Lanjit. Where's our science people? You are here. Yeah. This is, I know this is maybe used by a piano teacher when she's talking about, soon the chords just come naturally, or basketball and the follow through and stuff. But I'm looking at this idea of pathways that we fire, which ones we fire more often that come to us more frequently. Okay, here's the negative side. We all know somebody who thinks the world is full of idiots, right? Because it's like everywhere they look, there's another idiotic thing that they say. I would put forth that as we fire the idiot recognizing pathway, the more we fire it, the more we're going to see it. In this case, Gasikwa comes out there and says, Bernard, your daughters must be hungry. Here, do you want some chickens? And all of a sudden, I don't know the pathways that were firing in his neighbor's mind, but now pathways fire putting his little girl to bed last night and saying, Daddy, I'm hungry. I know, babe, tomorrow I'm going to try to find something. And instead of fire with fire, Gasikwa is coming out with kindness. And he is triggering other pathways in the brain. And Gasikwa doesn't just come up with this idea of chickens out of nowhere. He has been living a life of service and kindness and compassion. That's how his house got filled with people. And so he saw these neighbors not as the club machete swinging murderers that they had become in such a short time, but he saw them still as his neighbors. So I know I haven't done a super job of explaining this idea of neuropath. Let me just say that probably 18 years ago in my journaling, and I always feel like I have to give this disclaimer. I don't know why. I hated writing in high school. I hated writing in college. And now I love journaling. It's like I hate driving with a dirty windshield, and journaling is like cleaning the windshield. It gives me clarity and focus. About 18 years ago, I'm thinking to myself, I just feel like I'm too critical of my wife. She is awesome, and so I started writing in my journal every morning something positive from the day before, and if it was really a sweet one, I'd maybe put it on a sticky note and put it on the bathroom mirror, and after I'm not sure how long, I said, why aren't I doing this for our kids who are teens, preteens, and so I said, okay, so I start with our oldest Mindy, and I can't think of one thing. I'm embarrassed to say it's not her fault, it's my fault. As dad, I'm thinking, homework done, a room, I don't know, whatever I was thinking. But I wasn't looking for the good. So finding the good is something, I determined after that, there's not going to be a day goes by that I can't write down at least one positive thing about each one of the kids. I didn't know back then, because I hadn't yet started going for professional counseling, what a powerful tool finding the good would be. And so, okay, mindful of our time here, let's do a quick little, I'm going to kind of skip over the history, if you don't mind, of Rwanda this morning. Eugenics was there like it was here. What we already talked about, the majority of the people, Hutu, agriculture people, Tutsi, privilege. Unfortunately, the Twa were pushed to the side. Before the genocide, I would say there was a lot more love between, well, let's just say that, there's a lot more love between the Hutu and Tutsi. The Twa was pushed to the side. And so the planners of the genocide are going to have to work hard to break the bond. The stereotype, and this is what students are often asking, what's the difference? The stereotype would be that a Tutsi would be taller and lighter skinned with finer features, maybe thinner lips. The Hutu would be a darker with fuller features. But then they marry each other all the time, and your ID card will be whatever your dad's is. So that becomes mixed. So you can't really tell by looking at many of the people who's who, except for being in the ID card. Right here, Hutu is crossed out, Tutsi is their Twa. And so we will have been there, like I said, okay, I get too rushed here. We're there in 1990. We're there for 4 years. There's 3 years of war, which I just kind of went over real quick. And on April 6, 1994, the president's plane is shot down. And this is going to be the event that this small group of men and women who will be known as the planners and the executors of the genocide, that will be the event they will use to launch this horrific massacre of more than 1 million people. when we have a little more time to unpack this with students, we talk about the pathway to harm and the pathway to healing. And the two key words lately for me have been polarizing or restorative. And I say key words not just in the classroom, but in my own life. When I make a comment to my wife, say about some world leader, I think to myself now, is that comment restorative or is that comment polarizing? And so this morning we're not spending a lot of time on the polarizing portion. We're going to spend more time on the restorative portion. And I was interested to see your values. For me, as I've been looking at Rwanda and this journey out of genocide, I've been looking a lot at these three values of respect, empathy, and inclusion. I think we all are wired for purpose, and we're wired for community. We want to belong. Those are massive needs that we have. But to keep those needs in a healthy direction, we build an environment of respect. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but just hear me through on this little sequence. We build a habitat of respect where we can learn each other's story. And in learning each other's story, empathy just naturally grows. I think that's how we're wired. We're story animals, and we're also wired for empathy. And as I learn your story, I'm like, really that? Well, what about your grandpa? Well, I'd like you to come meet my wife. Inclusion becomes the icing on the cake. It becomes just a natural process. So this idea of REI, which one day I'm going to present it to REI, and they're going to be like, we want to sponsor you. But anyway, this idea of respect, empathy, and inclusion has become really central in a central framework for me when things come to knock you off center. How do you recenter? And respect, empathy, and inclusion are three of those values that do that. For me, my kind of working, I guess I could call it definition, it's not, but of genocide is genocide stems from thinking. I don't even want to finish that sentence. I'm talking to a group of kids in Fargo, North Dakota, and they're immigrants or refugees, and it's not English as a second language. For them, it's probably a third or fourth language. And I know each one of those kids here in America has experienced that. And so I won't go off on these different stories, but very quickly we can begin to understand why would we look at something as horrible as genocide on the other side of the world. And we begin to connect the dots. And we try to shift the thinking from my world, which really is only a construct between my ears. It's only something I've made up, to our world would be better with you in it. Quick little snapshot of the family back at that time. I've hardly changed at all. Okay, that's me, okay, in case you're wondering. My wife hasn't changed that much. The kids have changed a lot, yeah. The kids have changed a lot. We were there for 4 years. I love this little sketch. These little sketches you've seen, they're from a little 40-minute film that we send ahead. Some of you have probably already seen that, who are sending some students we'll get to talk to today. But the killing starts, and the young lady who had lived and worked in our home, who had loved on our kids, has a Tutsi ID card. And she's marked to be killed. And the young man who came in the evening as the watchman, he also had a Tutsi ID card. And so when the plane is shot down Wednesday night, the American government on Thursday says, we're not leaving. The rebels will take over the Rwandan Patriotic Front. I should have probably a couple bits in history. When the Belgians were there, they gave privilege to the minority, the Tutsi. And then when independence came, there was a backlash. Many Tutsis fled to neighboring countries. We'll be back in a couple weeks, couple months when it settles down. Nope. 10 years, nope. 20, 30 years later, they got military training, these refugees, and they came back known as the Rwandan Patriotic Front. And so within the context of war, it seems like that's an amazing habitat for humanity, for genocide to germinate in. And so the U.S. Embassy is saying, we're not leaving. These refugee soldiers, these rebel soldiers, RPF, they'll take over the city in a matter of a couple days. Friday, they're saying, no, we're leaving. Nobody's, we're not, no ambassador, nobody. But don't bring any Rwandans with you. If you bring any Rwandans, we'll be stopped at roadblocks. They'll cause a lot of problems for us. You can't bring any Rwandans in you. If they're Ugandan and you have a document that shows they're Ugandan, Kenya, anyone else, but, and you know, we rightfully condemn the planners of the genocide for targeting people just based on their ID card. But so my mom and dad are actually visiting at this time, and I won't take a lot of time except to say that Teresa and I go in the bedroom, we talk and we pray, and we make the decision that these people have given us so much privilege. We've been here for 4 years. We actually moved to Africa 6 weeks after we got married back in 1981. I was a shop teacher, auto mechanics, welding, that kind of fun stuff. And our daughters have been born in Zimbabwe, so Rwanda wasn't our first time there. And we had bonds in our hearts and that, but we're like, these people have treated us with such privilege. Maybe now we can use that privilege to help them. And so Teresa will take the kids to safety, and I will stay with the 2 young people in my house. I'll have more people in the house there with me. There's a pastor and his wife, and the story goes on. And we've got extra copies too in a book. If you'd like to read, I'm always happy to put a complimentary copy in a teacher's hands. But I will... I'm going to leave the story there. I will work during this time with Gasikwa and other colleagues to bring food and water and medicine. I'll work with planners of the genocide. This idea of finding allies among the group we call enemy is going to be crucial. But I'll be bringing food and water and medicine to 3 groups of orphans trapped around the city. And I'm not going to get into these stories because I want to end with this one this last summer. I'm there with a group of actually I was there with a group of high school kids from Chicago in June, kids from the inner city studying peace, and we saw all kinds of wonderful and tragic sights in Rwanda. But this is the lady I wanted to wrap up with you. Maria and I had several things in common. Maria was she's a year younger. She's born in 58. I was born in 57. At the time of the genocide, we both had 3 children. We both had these very difficult conversations with our spouses about the safety of our children. My wife and I had American passports, so we had options, and she took the children to safety. Maria and her husband had Tutsi ID cards. They had very little options. They decided to separate, which many families did during the genocide. The 5 of us will probably have who's going to hide? If we're in, you take the 2 boys, and Maria would take the baby girl. It would work for Maria and her baby daughter. It would not work for her husband and the sons. As standing next to her is Filbert, who Maria would identify as an incredibly valuable family friend. He does things for me that my sons would have done. That line I'll never forget. Now, I'm telling you the story different than I heard it, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong for doing this. I'm telling you the story as she would tell you the story today as a friend of the family. The way it was told to us in June was Filbert was part of the killing squad who killed her husband and sons. And as soon as I heard that, this barrier flew up in front of my face because I was there and I saw these things. And I had a hard time seeing past that 1994 barrier. His identity as a killer just was, and I didn't want to tell you that at the beginning because I wanted to give you a chance to see him the way Maria sees him. And this is not some magical miracle story, although it is, but it isn't. When I say it's not a magical miracle story, because it took years. Maria, she didn't want to see Filbert, but she wanted to know where her husband and sons were buried. And Filbert did confess, and he did help her. She says that was a massive turning point for me in getting free from anger and bitterness. I'm hesitant to talk about forgiveness because it means so many different things to different people. But Maria will have this turning point from anger and bitterness when she, because I think she could finally slow down that tape in her head, wondering what happened in those last moments. Did my boys suffer? Who was with them? Were they alone? Are they even dead? Because when you don't know where the grave is and everything, we got this illogical hope that maybe they're not, maybe they'll come through the door one day. And so for Maria to begin to process, I kind of hate to say move on. There's something seems wrong about that to me, but as Maria begins to process, the government has made the place safe. People can sleep at night without fear. And then they started a project for building homes, and she and Filbert are actually working together. And here's what I'm going to do, because I know bells are going to ring here. I wrote up this story, so I'll share it. Janine, you can share it with them if you'd like to finish reading about this story. But what I thought about her story and what I thought about here today is what you have in common with the Rwandan government. You work to build an atmosphere, a habitat where people can have meaningful encounters. And in those meaningful encounters, they have opportunities to build new neural pathways. For me, I'm always talking about respect, empathy, and inclusion. You're talking about, let me see, I can remember, courage, respect, influence. I saw the banner out there. And we're building those pathways in our mind, a habitat where those pathways can grow. And yeah, let's just leave it there. Thank you guys for the chance to talk this morning. And thanks. And if you'd like, you're welcome to have a copy of the book here as you make your way out. And I'll share that story of Marie and Filbert that I wrote up from this summer with a lot more of the steps of that journey that they both took.